All right, another little test video here. Has been a while since I put something up, and I was messing around in the studio today and wanted to experiment with my Voyager old school and feeding stuff in to the external input. And when I say stuff, I mean my Moogerfooger collection. So I'm going to try and piece together a couple of examples here on some of the different things that you can feed in there. I have all of the different Moogerfoogers. The most logical thing to feed in is the FreqBox. So the FreqBox being an external VCO that will track to the pitch of a single instrument like a guitar or a bass, or in some cases other instruments. But I found the tracking to be pretty good, but a little bit wonky, so I prefer to run that with CV out of the old school straight into the FreqBox, and we'll get to that in a second. I want to start out with the Ring Modulator, the MF-102. Now on the MF-102 you've got a oscillator output for the modulation oscillator and a frequency control to control that output. So let me do a little bit of test here. I will show you. I've got oscillator 1 on the Voyager set to triangle wave, and here's kind of some of how it sounds. And in the higher range you can get, just as an example. So let me go ahead and switch that out, and I will switch in the oscillator. I have the CV out of the Voyager patched into the frequency of the modulation oscillator of the MF-102, and then the frequency of that, the oscillator from the MF-102 out into the external input here. So you're going to hear, hopefully with these cheap iPhone microphone here, a difference in the timbre. So let me just really quickly, since I blabbed a bit, there is the timbre of triangle VCO. And I have it filtered a little bit. I'll show you in a second unfiltered. Now, here's the external. Comparison. And this is the internal oscillator, and this is the MF-102. Now, one thing that must be said about the MF-102 is, although it is a excellent ring modulator and wonderful tremolo, actually, the pitch control, the pitch tracking of the internal oscillator is pretty horrible. So to give you an example, I'll just do a 1 octave. You can hear as you go up the register there on the keyboard, it starts to sound pretty sour. But very useful. Let me see if I can, gosh, I don't know how I can position this. I will set the phone down for a second and show you. I'm going to turn the filtering off here, turn this down a little bit, turn the resonance down, and listen to this. Let me just set the phone down here. All I'm doing is playing the keys like this and turning the frequency of the oscillator up and down. You can get some pretty cool sci-fi effects when tracking is not that important, but let's move on to the MF-101, the good old-fashioned low-pass filter, and see how that sounds through the external input. Okay, so now I have the MF-101 low-pass filter patched into the external input of the old school. Now there are a couple of different choices here. Obviously, using this as an oscillator, we want to self-oscillate the filter, but do we want to use 2-pole or 4-pole? And at the end of the day, they track exactly the same, but the 2-pole setting results in a much louder output oscillation wave. I'm not sure why that is. Probably has to do with the structure of the 4-pole. I'm not a scientist, or I'd be making these things myself. Anyways, so let me play a note on the keyboard, and this is the raw tone of the filter oscillating. Okay, so I'll lock this in. And on the old school, you can hold a note, which I'll do here. If I can get it, show it to you. It's stinking thing. I got my note held right there, and you can turn the external gate, envelope gate, off. That switch right there. Now the note's held. And I'll bring in the oscillator 1 from the Voyager now. A bit louder. still set as triangle wave, and we're going to tune the filter to that oscillator. Okay, close enough. So now you hear both the MF-101 and the Voyager oscillator together. So let's turn the gate off. Now we're back to being able to play this from the keyboard. That's about 1 octave worth of tracking up the register, and it's already off quite a bit. So you'll notice as I go up key by key, you'll hear the frequency start to separate. And that's due to the less than stellar tracking as far as volt per octave goes on the MF-101. So here we go. A little bit of phasing. Go all the way up to the top here. Kind of can get into the ring modulated tones, or if it's not technically ring modulation, but just oscillating one oscillator at a much higher frequency than the other, you can get some really kind of cool bell-like tones. However, turning off the external signal here, so the MF-101 is no longer there, and we're back down to just the oscillator from the Voyager. Okay, we'll bring in the MF-101. So you can hear those oscillation, with the oscillation being slightly off, you hear the wave being out of sync a little bit, and it gives it that kind of wonderful pulsing. If you're into dubstep or anything like that, that can really be a sought-after effect, particularly more with pulse waves, but it can be cool in the sine domain as well. So one thing you can also do is, let's do a held note. Gate is off again, held note, and I'm going to tune this down, the filter. Okay, it's pretty rough, but we get the idea here. You can start to get the 2 VCO, although one not being in sync type of effects. Overall, pretty cool. Now let's see if there's anything else here that I've got, and we'll end up with the MF-107. Okay, so what we've got now, we've got the MF-103 12-stage phaser, and you wouldn't think of this as typically having a VCO type of potential. However, it does have an LFO on board, and if you set the rate high enough, you can make some magic happen. So we do have the rate set rather high. It is set on high with the switch, and then it's dialed up to about 2 o'clock right now on the knob. And that results in a pitch at middle C like this, which it doesn't sound so bad. And the problem is, as it was with the other device, is the tracking. So let me bring in oscillator 1 on the old school, and here is the same middle C. You can hear both oscillators in phase, but as I do this, bad tracking. And it's not meant to track, but it can be quite useful. So one of the things I do also notice about this is the rate of the oscillator, the frequency of the oscillator that I should say is controlled by the rate, has to be low. Like if I dial this rate up too high, let's just peg it up there almost. I'll just turn it all the way up. What the hell? And here we go with just the external signal. You can hear as I'll pull back a little bit as I go up the keyboard. It loses the ability to track above a certain frequency. So let's show that again. From about here up. So I think that probably has some relation to the fact that the MF-107 also has some tracking limitations and how you can expect the VCO to track, but not altogether useful as a VCO, but still useful as an experiment. So let's move on finally to the MF-107, the one everybody would expect to be used as a fourth VCO.